What if your biggest obstacle to happiness isn't your job, not even your relationships, not your current circumstances? Maybe your biggest obstacle to happiness is that little story that you tell yourself of I'll be happy when. I'll be happy when I get the job, when I get the house. And what you're doing is you're mentally wiring your brain to constantly delay your own happiness. Well, today I'm going to show you how to break that cycle. And if you're new here, I'm Henderson, trained at Harvard in human behavior, and I help people create a life that feels as good on the inside as it looks on the outside. So if that sounds like the type of life that you want to live, I want to encourage you to stay around for this video and also hit that subscribe button. So let me start by asking you the question, what is your I'll be happy when story? What comes after that? Is it when I lose weight? Is it, as I said before, when I get that job, I get that house, I get that thing? And I invite you to become really curious about what that story is, because the challenge is when we have the I'll be happy when in our mind, all of our happiness is now dependent on something external from us. We put our power outside of us. And when we've done that, we're never going to find happiness. And what's actually happening is we're thinking about happiness in the absolute wrong way. So if you can do me a favor and get that I'll be happy when statement in your mind, hold it, because we're going to be revisiting it throughout this video as a way to help you start to let go of it, reframe it, and give yourself permission to be happy right now. You know, a few months ago, I was sitting with a friend of mine, and they were reflecting on the loss of their spouse that had just happened 8 months ago. And they were sharing their story about when they received that terminal diagnosis as a couple, and how their spouse was only supposed to live for another year after receiving that diagnosis. But what wound up happening is that their spouse lived for another 4 years after receiving that diagnosis. And they shared with me how sweet those last 4 years of their relationship was. Now, they already had a really healthy, beautiful relationship, but those last 4 years, they said, were some of the most sweet and precious time within their relationship. And so I asked them, what made those last 4 years so precious? What made them so beautiful? And they began to share, and they talked about the reality hit them both of the time being short that they had with one another, the person that they loved so deeply. And they told me how much they both wanted to savor those moments, cherish those moments. They had a fundamental shift in their mindset on how they saw life and how they saw their relationship. And what had happened for them was that terminal diagnosis brought the reality of death close. It brought it into the present moment. And after I left my conversation with them, I was really reflecting on this truth that we all have a terminal diagnosis. It's called being human. We're all going to die. I'm not trying to be morbid here, but it's just the reality of it. We're all going to die, but most of us live life, me included, like we're going to live forever. And what a terminal diagnosis does is it brings that reality home. We can no longer pretend like we're going to live forever. We can no longer ignore that life is passing us by minute by minute, day by day. And we can no longer ignore the choices that we're making, or we become so aware of the choices that we're making each day in this short time that we have left. And it changes the things that we value and we put our attention on. And the research shows us that people will often live differently after receiving a diagnosis. And the people who love the people who have received a terminal diagnosis also can start to live differently as well as they become aware of that ticking clock. And I have to admit, since that conversation, I've been asking myself the question, what would happen if I lived my life like I have a terminal diagnosis? Because once again, I do, you do, and it's called being human. And none of us get to escape that reality. I know some people are trying to figure out how we can escape that reality, but for now, we all have a terminal diagnosis. We're all going to die. And if we were to live that way, and if we were to have the realization, and it were to really hit home, how would you live your life? How would I live my life? What would be different? And let's go back to that original question that I talked about in the beginning of I'll be happy when. I mean, if we lived like we had a terminal diagnosis, would we give ourselves the permission to let go of the I'll be happy when? That when part. Could we shift it to I'll be happy? I am giving myself the permission to be happy. It's a powerful shift in our mentality when we start to think about the fact that the only thing that's keeping us from being happy is our mindset that we have to get to a place where we can give ourselves the permission to be happy. Because what we're doing when we don't give ourselves that permission is we're robbing ourselves from life, from the experiences that are right in front of us, because we keep putting it out there somewhere, right? That when I arrive to XYZ point, then I can be happy. But I want to encourage you on something. There's no guarantee that you're even going to get to that finish line of what you think is going to make you happy. And so you're delaying your happiness, thinking that when you get there, you're going to then be happy. But the truth is, once again, you might not ever get to that place. Life's short, as we've just talked about. And this is the reality and the conversation that you'll hear from many people when they're on their deathbed. I wish I would have given myself permission to be happy, to stop worrying about things so much, and to make deep connections to people, to myself, and to life. And when a person hasn't given themselves that permission, and they've been waiting their entire lives to give themselves that permission, and they show up in that moment where death is a reality and it's knocking on the door, one of the biggest regrets is I didn't give myself permission to enjoy life sooner, that I was waiting for all of these external circumstances to be just right before I could have that permission. But let me just encourage you and say it again. You can give yourself permission today to be happy, and I want to start talking to you about how you can do that. So let me ask you again, back to that question, what is your I'll be happy when story? What's that narrative? What comes after the when in that statement? Because it's really important to identify that, because that is exposing or bringing up a core limiting belief about what you believe you're worthy of, or what's blocking you from giving yourself the permission to be happy and creating a life that feels as good on the inside as it looks on the outside. Now, for a moment, I want you to not just think about the I'll be happy when and what comes after that. I want you to think about the story that's underneath that subconscious story that you have, because here's the truth about it. Most of the time, we're not giving ourselves the permission to be happy because we have a subconscious belief that we're not worthy of happiness. That when statement is simply our excuse that's keeping us from being happy. And why would we do that? Well, because happiness may not feel safe to you. Giving yourself permission to be happy might feel like you're setting yourself up for disappointment. You might feel like that if you give yourself permission to experience and savor and enjoy those good things or have them come into your life, that they're going to be taken away. And why do you feel that way? It's often because you don't believe that you deserve happiness. You believe that you have to earn it. You believe that you have to do all of these things in order to give yourself the permission to be happy. And that's a reality for most people who say, I'll be happy when. Now, the other reality is a lot of people get addicted to the dopamine cycle, where they get more addicted to the chase of a reward, the chase of trying to be happy, than happiness in and of itself. They're not actually anymore pursuing trying to be happy. They've gotten addicted to the chase of happiness. And so to give themselves permission to be happy wouldn't feel safe to them, because they're so committed to that activity, the pursuit, and the dopamine payoff that happens as a result of that. So I want to encourage you to take a moment and start getting curious about the story underneath the surface story of I'll be happy when. What's just right under the surface of it? What's the pattern behind it? Is there a sense of unworthiness? Is there an addiction to trying to prove yourself or to achieve? And so giving yourself permission to be happy would be letting off of the gas. And you feel like that pursuit of happiness is what's pushing you forward to accomplish all of the things that you're trying to accomplish. But yet you're never allowing yourself to enjoy all of the things that you're working so hard to accumulate and to achieve. Is there a fear that if you get the things that are going to make you happy, they're going to be taken away from you? And let me ask you, what makes you believe that you have to get to a certain place, or you have to do certain things, or you have to earn certain things, you have to be a certain person, or all these things have to fall in place before you can deserve happiness, before you can allow your nervous system to relax and actually enjoy your life? And here's another thing. You might even have the narrative that other people can be happy. Other people can give themselves the permission to be happy. Other people deserve this life of happiness, but I don't, because I have to be somebody before I can have it. I have to achieve something before I can have it. I want to take a moment and ask you to consider, I want to invite you to consider that all of that is just a story. All of those reasons that get in the way of you giving yourself permission to be happy, it's just a story. It's not truth, and it's something that is simply creating suffering in your life as a protection mechanism that you developed in order to stay safe. And you do have the power, you do have the ability to choose to be happy. And I know it sounds cliche, but happiness is an inside job. It is a choice. And here's the truth around the things that we always say are cliche. The truth about them is that they're repeated, simple truths. And just because they're repeated, simple truth doesn't mean that they're not true. And what we do when we label something simply as cliche, we've just found another way to dismiss our own happiness. We've just made another excuse or created another barrier for ourselves in order for us to stay safe. And you can let go of that story. And it's really important that you start to notice every story that comes up that's blocking you from your happiness, whether it's a cliche, or I've tried it before, or that doesn't feel familiar to me, or whatever that narrative is. It once again is just a story that you can choose to change, because if that story got wired in you, you can unwire it and you can develop a new story. Now, here's also another truth that I want to make sure that you know. Just because happiness is a choice, it doesn't mean that it's an easy choice. And it doesn't mean that it's always an easy path. Happiness is work. And believe me, I wish that it wasn't, but there is a level of work that goes into being happy. And for a lot of people, they feel like that happiness should just show up on their doorstep. And they're once again putting all of their power outside of themselves and not realizing that if they'll do the work internally, they can create that life that feels good. They can create their own internal happiness. And all the research supports this. I love the long-term study at Harvard University, the longest study on human well-being. It says that happiness is a choice, and there's things that contribute to our happiness, like relationships being the key one, but it is still a choice. I love the work of Sonia Lyubomirsky's work on the how of happiness and how we can do happiness activities that actually support and increase our happiness levels. And for me, that's fantastic news to know that I have the agency to develop happiness, because I spent many years of my life not being happy and being frustrated that I had to work at happiness. Once again, I was one of those who felt like you shouldn't have to work at it. But when I realized the truth that I can work at it, I can create habits that help me be more happy, it got me off that emotional roller coaster of happiness. Because as long as we put, once again, all of our dependency on external things or other people for our happiness, we don't have any control over that. You don't have any control of whether or not your company is going to do a big layoff. You don't have any control of the stock market or the financial situations. You don't have any control over other people and how they choose to show up. The one thing that you have control over is you and your inner state. But here's the reality. For many of us, that's the last place that we put our attention toward, right? Because we feel like it's easier just to get something out there to give us the dopamine hit and feel happy for a little bit. But then later we crash and then we think, well, what's wrong with me that I can't stay happy? There's nothing wrong with you. We're just looking for happiness in the wrong things. And the entire time, happiness lives right inside of you. And many of us don't want to believe that because we have a view of ourselves that we're not worthy. And why would there be happiness in here when I don't feel like a happy person, or I feel bad about me, or I carry shame? How could I possibly be a source of happiness? Well, once again, I want to encourage you that all of that narrative that I just described is wiring, it's learned behavior, and we actually can get addicted to feeling like that about ourselves. Yes, you can get addicted to feeling terrible. You can get addicted to feeling depressed. You can get addicted to feeling shame. And what all those stories and narratives that we have about ourselves are doing is they're protecting us. They're protecting us from the fears that we have that we mentioned earlier. They're trying to align us with our core beliefs about ourselves. And then as a result, we actually start to sabotage happiness out of our lives. And we start to align our outer world to match the way that we feel in our inner world. And so if we don't feel happy in here, then we're going to create an external world that doesn't allow us to be happy. We're going to create environments that reinforce the way that we feel about ourselves. And the challenge is we keep thinking if we pull enough of the outer world in here, it'll fix this in here, and then we'll feel good. Doesn't work that way. It's reverse, right? We get the work here, and then it begins to be reflected externally. It's almost a law of life that what we feel in here begins to manifest in what's going on outside of us. And I finally came to the point that realization was, as I shared earlier, really good news. Because I realized, and I said this in my book, that if I have the power to create suffering and unhappiness in my life, I also have the power to create healing. I also have the power to create a life that feels good in here, that feels like I'm thriving. And what's happening when we do that, when we have that realization, is that we're taking control. We're taking agency over what's going on in here. Because for most people, this is the challenge, right? It doesn't feel so good being inside of here. It doesn't feel so good being with us. And no matter what happens outside of us, we wonder, why can't I feel good in here? Well, you can feel good in here. And one of the first steps in making that happen is for you to realize that it is in here and that you have the power and the ability to make this inner world feel okay inside. And number one, you've got to realize that that's the source of it. Number two, that you have the power to do it. And number three, to begin to take action towards it. You know, a year ago this time, exactly during this time, I was walking the Camino de Santiago. And if you're not familiar with the Camino de Santiago, it's a pilgrimage, it's a walk, it's a time of reflection to do deep internal work. And there's many paths to walk for the Camino de Santiago, but all the paths lead to the St. James Cathedral in Santiago, Spain. Now, I chose to walk what is known as the French way. And it starts in France, and then it goes through Spain, and it ends in the city of Santiago. It's a 500-mile walk, or about 780 to 800 kilometers. And it took me 30 days to do that walk, to do that journey. And the reason I did it was there was a lot going on that I wanted to process. There were some major transitions happening in my life. I just needed space to process those things, to clear my head. And while walking the Camino, I did a lot of deep internal work, a lot of reflection, a lot of self-discovery. I took a lot of time to simply be, to be present, to enjoy nature, to enjoy the animals, to enjoy the different cultures and foods and everything that I was experiencing. It really brought up a lot of positive emotions in my life. And I would say it's been one of the most transformative experiences that I've ever had in my life. So much so that I have this deep desire to go back and to walk it again. And I will eventually. But the other day I was reflecting on it and I was thinking about, because of the time that I was there just a year ago, when I wanted to go back, and I was getting excited, and I started to talk to my wife about it and started to make plans for her and I to go do it together. We both got so excited about it, we thought, well, let's just go do it in the next 2 weeks. Let's just take off and go for it. And then I started making all these plans in my mind, thinking about all the things that we needed to do, getting really excited. Well, then some reality set in, right? That we're both in the middle of a semester in university. She's finishing her master's degree for nutrition and holistic health, and I'm finishing out a semester at Harvard University. And we both got a lot going on and other plans that would be very difficult to move at this season in our life. And so after some discussion, we decided to wait on going to the Camino, maybe for another year or so. Well, as I thought about it, I began to think to myself, I'm the one who created that state while I was on the Camino. I'm the one who gave meaning to that experience. And then I began to think, well, instead of going to the Camino, how can I bring the Camino here to my neighborhood? Because one of the things I like to do is I like to take walks in the neighborhood. They help me clear my brain. They help me shift my energies. And those walks have become a very creative space for me. And it's a life-giving space for me. And so I thought, let me see what would happen if I were to go on one of those walks around the neighborhood and try to shift my state to the state that I was experiencing while I was on the Camino. Once again, bringing the Camino here. And so what I did was I set my intention that during this walk, I'm really going to be mindful. I'm really going to connect with myself and nature. And then I decided to put on the playlist that I was listening to frequently while I was walking the Camino. And you know what happened? After just 5 minutes of starting that walk, I found myself in that same deep experience that I was having while I was on the Camino. I felt very present. I felt very connected to myself because guess what? What was happening? I was making the choice to activate all of those things inside of me that I was activating over there in Spain. And then all of a sudden, I was releasing all those feel-good chemicals, and I was in a very positive state. And I actually got emotionally overwhelmed, and I had to sit down during the middle of my walk. And I think what was happening for me and why this was such a powerful experience and why I was getting so overwhelmed was because I realized and I reconnected to the truth that I have the power to shift my internal state. I am not at the mercy of external environments. I don't have to go somewhere to be happy. I don't have to bring something to me in order to be happy. I have an internal pharmacy that lives inside of me, and so do you. And through our intentions, our choices, our actions, we can create a life in here that feels as good on the inside as it looks on the outside. We can create a state of happiness. And when I was sitting with that truth once again and reconnecting with that truth, it was just really overwhelming. And all of the emotions were there. All of the connection was there. And it was interesting because it was both an experience of the present moment, and it was also a very deeply healing moment for me as well. And I have to say that once you realize you have that power and you begin to experience it, it is absolutely liberating, absolutely freeing. Now, am I saying that we're all just going to be walking around in constant states of happiness all of the time? I don't know, maybe. But what I do know is that we can at least change the ratio right now of our happiness versus our unhappiness. So right now, if you're at a 70% unhappy, 30% happy ratio, you can change that ratio. And you can start by just moving the needle, even if it's just 1%, 5%, 10%, whatever it is that helps you move towards more happiness, to move along that journey. And one of the key ways that you can do that is by letting go of the story that you'll be happy when. And for me, that moment on that walk was an example of me letting go of the I'll be happy when, or I'll feel that when. I'll feel it when I get to the Camino. I have to go back to the Camino to have that experience again. Absolutely not. The truth is, I can access it at any moment when I'm intentional about it, when I do the work to do it and to shift my internal emotional state. And I have to say, the reward of doing that work, absolutely worth it. And I have to say for you, the work that you'd have to do is going to be absolutely worth it, and you're worthy of it. You're worthy of that work. You are worthy of a life of happiness. You deserve happiness. So let me invite you right now into an exercise. Once again, what is that story of I'll be happy when? Can you write that down? Can you take a moment and just get really familiar with it? And then from there, can you get curious about the story that's right underneath that? What's the fear? Is there a sense of unworthiness? Is there a sense that you have to deserve it? You have to do something to get it? All of those things are protective factors. They're not truth. And what getting curious about it is going to do for you is it's going to help you see that narrative. It's going to help you see that story. And then you can begin to replace it with a different story. You can begin to replace it with the story that happiness is my birthright, that I have the power to create happiness, that I'm in charge of what goes on inside of here, that I can choose happiness. Because here's the truth about happiness. Every person deserves it. It's the birthright of every single person. But the challenge is we don't always get what we deserve. We don't always get what is our birthright handed to us. We have to take active action to choose it. And 99% of the time, the only thing that's keeping us from choosing it is the story that we have of I'll be happy when XYZ happens. I'll give myself permission to be happy when this happens and I accomplish 1, 2, or 3, or I'll feel worthy of it when ABC happens, or it doesn't feel safe for me to thrive because I have to have 1, 2, or 3. Like, what are those stories? Those stories are exactly that. They're just stories. I'm going to keep repeating that. They are just stories that you created. You might be saying, I didn't create those stories. That's just how life works. That's what I grew up in, etc. No, we each have the power to choose the story that we continue to hold on to. Now, we didn't have the choice of what family we were born into, what culture, etc. But we do have the power to choose what stories stick with us and the stories that drive our lives. This is absolutely research-backed, evidence-based, that you have the power to choose your story and to align your life with a new story, a story that says, I'm going to choose to be happy. There are no conditions to my happiness. And if you feel resistance around that statement even, I invite you to get curious about the story that creates that resistance for you. And then once again, as you identify that story and then you choose to replace that story with a more true story about your own agency, your own ability to choose happiness, it can absolutely change your life. There is nothing preventing you from being happy right now, regardless of what your circumstances are, regardless of what you're experiencing right now. And you might say, well, you don't know my story, you don't know my experience. And I can say to you, you don't know my story, you don't know my experience that I had 6, 7, 8 years ago, and all the reasons why I said I couldn't be happy, and the choices that I had to make to give myself permission to be happy. You can do this. Absolutely believe in you. Now, if you'd like more information about the work I do and to learn more about the coaching that I offer, you can go to my website at jerryhenderson.org, or you can see the description section of this video. And while you're there, set up a free strategy call where we can connect and determine if working together is the right fit. Well, thank you for sharing your time with me today. And if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe to this channel, take a moment to do that. I think you'll find a lot of resources there that'll help you on your journey of creating a life that feels as good on the inside as it looks on the outside.